everyone, and welcome to the MEFA Podcast. I'm Jonathan Hughes.
And I'm Julie Shields-Rutyna.
Hey, Julie, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Okay, doing pretty well. I'm very excited about this show because we got another great guest this week. Founder and president of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, Betsy Mayotte, will be joining us. And there's just about nobody who knows more about student loans than Betsy. She's contributed to the U.S. News and World Report, HuffPost, and Yahoo, among others. And she's always a coveted speaker and presenter at any conference at which she appears. And Julie, what is she going to be discussing with us today?
Yes, well, she'll be discussing the end of the federal student loan repayment freeze.
And
the COVID relief package and the resumption of repayment, as well as some of the new changes to the federal public service loan forgiveness program. And as you know, there is nobody better to talk about these things than Betsy, so you definitely want to stick around.
Absolutely. So before we get to that, though, I thought we would talk about the FAFSA today. Now, why should we talk about the FAFSA? Well, because starting October 1st, parents of seniors in high school and anyone else who's attending college next year wants financial aid have been able to file the FAFSA. And so this is the beginning of financial aid season, really. And as such, MEFA has been hosting webinars on college financing. And it's not an exaggeration to say that thousands of people have attended those webinars and they have questions. So we thought it would be a good idea to go over some of the more popular questions that we've been getting, as you probably have those questions too. And we're going to skip our mailbag today because these are all kind of mailbag questions. But having said that, Julie, let's get to our first question. All right. So I'm going to ask you again. This is a stump the band situation here. So big question that we get. What do I do if my 2020 income is much higher than my 2021 income?
That is a big question we get. And in fact, we've received it. We've always received that question, but it seems even more common since COVID and all of that. So basically, if you're filing your FAFSA this year, you are going to use your 2020 tax return information, no matter what. So just complete the form using that information. But then you can always let the financial aid offices know that there's been a change, and that's, for your family, a big difference. One way that some families can let the financial aid offices know is if they also need to file the CSS profile form, which some colleges require. There is a space where families can write in that information and give that additional information. But if you're applying to a school that just requires the FAFSA, then you might want to send a separate letter or email to the colleges that you're applying to, just making them aware of that change and that difference. And then they will be in touch with you to let you know further steps.
Excellent. Yeah. And that hits upon one of our main themes that we talk about a lot, which is talk to the financial aid office. The financial aid office is a resource for you. Anything that doesn't fit in the confines of the FAFSA, if that's all you have to file, should be brought up to the financial aid office. So that's one of the things you'll hear us talk about a lot. So moving on to the next question. Now, this is good because I saw this question come in and I wanted to know the answer to it. So does my son need to register for selective service to be eligible for financial aid?
Yes. Well, for as long as I have been in financial aid, which is a very long time, that question has been on the FAFSA. And the answer used to be yes, that males over 18 had to be registered for the selective service. But that question is going away on the FAFSA. So although it's still asked about this year, it is an optional question and it will be going away in the future. So that is no longer something that is tied to your application for federal aid.
So you say it's going away. So it's still on the FAFSA now. So if you're filing it now and you want financial aid, do you have to say yes to that?
No, that question is just not going to be looked at this year. So you can say no or whatever is true, and it's just not going to be counted this year. Financial aid offices are not using that question this year. And we won't be using it in the future, but in the future, the question won't even be asked, which will be less confusing.
I see. And it's just in case anybody doesn't know, could you just tell them what selective service is?
Males registering for the draft. And it used to be, I don't really know why. I never really knew. I never really had a good answer as to why that was connected to the financial aid form, but it has been.
There's a question on the FAFSA that asks, and I think it's right after you start listing your colleges, does the student plan to live on campus? So a lot of times people are not really sure of their plans or their children's plans. So we get that question a lot. What should I do?
Yes, I usually advise people to make a choice that would be your ideal choice. So of course you won't know until you receive your financial aid offer back. Do you have enough money that's going to cover costs for you to live on campus, or will it be more cost effective to live at home? You'll make all those choices. But I guess when you're completing the FAFSA, it's best to just choose what would be your first choice. Well, I'd like to live on campus. Great. Then choose that. And there's plenty of time. If you do change that, then costs change, your financial aid offer can change, all of that. Don't worry about it, but put your answer as your first choice of what you would like to. Would you like to live on campus at that institution? Then choose yes. Or if you know for a fact you're going to be living at home, you can choose no.
And so just to ask a follow-up, which I know is a lot of the times on the minds of parents, does this affect financial aid if they say yes or no one way or the other?
Because housing is a big cost, yes, it does affect financial aid. And in fact, you would potentially be offered more aid if you were living on campus. So that's important to know.
Okay, good to know. Another question that I think of as being sort of tied to this question, it's very similar, and it's one that I got the other day. The FAFSA asks also if you want to be considered for work study. Do you want to be eligible for work study? And I had a parent who could not figure out what to put for that question. Could you explain that question a little bit?
Yeah, so as people may know, federal work study is a program where when a student starts college, that they are able to get a job many times on campus or working for someone on campus, and work 10 to 12 hours per week and then receive a paycheck. And they use that usually for personal miscellaneous expenses, maybe some books, things like that. All the research shows that students who do a little bit of work, who work a little bit, something like 10 to 12 hours a week, it ends up being a real positive for them. They end up making connections on campus and making connections with some adults on campus. And, sometimes they find interesting work, or sometimes they find work that, they're sitting at the front desk of the library checking people in, but they can get their homework done. So there are lots of options like that. So it can be a really positive chance to earn some extra money. So I would say yes, because then if you're offered work study, that's potentially something great. And then if you don't choose to get a job, that's fine. If you don't access the work study and get a job, then halfway through the year, they might ask you, do you plan to? And if you say no, they'll give it to someone else. So there's no harm in saying yes. And a really important piece that might have been a follow-up, John, is that if you say no, it doesn't mean you're going to get any more grant money or any more money in any other form. And I think that's a thing that parents sometimes wonder.
Yes, that was exactly the question that the parent I was talking to had, and it was something that I was going to ask you. Does that mean more aid in another way? So good. I'm glad you answered that. Good one coming up next. Do I include a graduate student in the household as a child that will be in college next year? Okay. So I was wondering if you could actually just reference the question first and then the answer, because I think that may confuse some people what I just said.
Okay, yes. So I'll just say when a student is a graduate student, they're automatically independent. So if there's a graduate student in the family, that student will be applying for his or her own financial aid, which is great. But then how do you, as parent and students of an undergraduate student, how do you complete the FAFSA and count that graduate student? And the truth is, if the graduate student is living in your household and you are providing more than half of their support, you can list them as a member of your household and a student. So that's great.
And then, so if you could explain the impact of why that would matter if they were part of your household.
Yeah, in the financial aid formula, when colleges are trying to determine how much you're able to pay toward college expenses, they look at a lot of things. And one of the things they look at is how many people are in your household and how many students are in college at one time, because those things affect how much available income you would have or discretionary income to be able to pay. So those things factor in. So that's important that you can put that graduate student as a member of your household as long as you're paying more than half the expenses.
We'll end on this one. This will be our sort of timely question. Do I need to report stimulus money on the FAFSA?
Yeah, and the answer is no. So that's a great thing. Here is the guidance from the Department of Education that says, no, you do not need to report your stimulus money on the FAFSA. Stimulus checks or federal coronavirus related grants should not be input on the free application for federal student aid form as income in any way, taxable or untaxed income. However, you should list the full amount of funds in your bank account at the time you're completing the FAFSA form, regardless of where the funding originated.
Okay, so that makes sense. So it doesn't show up as income, but if the money is in a bank account or in an asset of yours, it would be expected to be reported as that asset. Okay, well, that does it for the FAFSA questions. If you have any questions, remember, you can please reach out to us at collegeplanning@mefa.org, or you can call us at 1-800-449-MEFA. We have a bench of college guidance experts ready to answer your questions. You can also reach us at social media on Facebook at MEFA/MA and Twitter at MEFA Tweets. And finally, on Instagram at MEFA_MA. Now let's go to my conversation with President and founder of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, Betsy Mayotte. Betsy Mayotte is the founder and president of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, a resource which gives student loan borrowers access to free, fair student loan advice and dispute resolution. She's also regularly quoted in the media on student loan issues, including in the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Boston Globe, and has contributed articles to the U.S. News and World Report, Yahoo, and HuffPost, among others, including that Newsweek magazine that you see behind her. That's the cover story that they are quoted in. And I say all of this just to say how lucky we are to have her here with us today to discuss the resumption of federal student loan repayment that paused with the CARES Act. So, Betsy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. I love talking about this stuff, and I'm really glad that we're going to get this information out to your audience. It's really important.
I wonder if you could talk, because I did mention, some of your background, but I don't think I quite got it. Could you just explain what led you, your path and what led you to create the Institute of Student Loan Advisors?
The answer I sometimes give people is, my father had a career in credit union leadership, and my mother was a teacher. So I tell people that education finance was my genetic destiny. But the truth of the matter is, I've been involved in the student loan industry since the dinosaurs roamed. It feels like it's been over 25 years at this point. And I spent the majority of my career as a compliance officer at a large nonprofit student loan organization in Boston. And over the course of my career as a compliance officer, my job was to have sort of a nerd level knowledge of student loan regulations and laws in order to make sure the company was doing what it was supposed to. But as sort of a side effect of that, I realized that because I had that detailed understanding of the regulations, that could also be really helpful to borrowers. So it started with, sort of me getting the more complex cases on my desk. And then gradually I was lucky enough to work for leadership that let me evolve my role. So while I stayed as a compliance officer, I also branched out into student loan borrower advocacy. And during that, I felt the two things went really great together because not only was I able to use my knowledge to help borrowers to have an impact, but also seeing the way the regulations affected people in real life helped me as a compliance officer, because when I had the opportunity to influence those regulations, I had that experience to sort of submit as part of the conversation. So during that time, I came to what I learned was that first of all, that there were a lot of scams that were developing out there that borrowers were falling victim to. And then I noticed that a lot of people were asking student loan questions on social media. And that flummoxed me. Like, why would you ask questions to internet strangers where you don't know their credentials on something so important? And so that led me to believe, between the scams and that experience, that consumers were looking for a third party that had no vested interest in their loans, that could provide them with expert advice, and they knew that it was neutral and safe and correct. And I looked around for someone that was doing that kind of work, and I couldn't find anyone. So I decided to found TISLA, and here we are.
And it's a free resource as well.
Right. We're a 501c3 charity. So anyone can email us with their questions or if they have a dispute, and we answer most emails within a business day. And there's zero charge for that. We will never charge borrowers for anything.
We're going to be talking about this student loan repayment pause, and that is coming to an end. So can you tell us how this came about in the first place?
Yeah, so this is just the past 2 years in student loans has just been really interesting and exciting, because there's been several things that have happened that nothing anywhere close to that has happened in my entire career. And let's start with these student loan repayment waivers that came as a result of the pandemic. Now, prior to COVID, I've been through my share of disasters in the student loan industry: Hurricane Katrina, 9/11, the California wildfires. And there has always been some sort of relief offered to federal student loan borrowers, but that was in the form of a forbearance. So interest still accrued. It was usually only for 90 days. So when the CARES Act waivers came out, this was really unprecedented, because so technically they're calling it a forbearance. I'm calling it a waiver because it doesn't act like any other forbearance a borrower might recognize. So not only did it put payments on hold, it gave the borrower 0% interest. So they're not harmed because the payments are on hold and interest is still accruing. It also is showing up on their credit report like they're in a repayment status and in good standing. So it's not only not harming the borrower because the loans are on hold, in some cases it might actually be helping them, especially if maybe they were they had their payment paused due to financial hardship prior to COVID. These months also count towards the number of payments you need to get forgiveness under either public service loan forgiveness, the temporary expansion of PSLF, or the income-driven plans. As long as you're fulfilling the other criteria, such as working full-time for an eligible employer, they're going to give you credit just like you made a payment. In fact, I've worked with dozens, if not hundreds, of people that have received forgiveness during COVID, utilizing the COVID months. The COVID waivers also for borrowers that may have defaulted during COVID. Some of those defaults are being reversed because of these CARES Act waivers. If the borrower was already in default, there's a program called rehabilitation, where if you make 9 payments on time in a row, they'll reverse the default and lower the collection costs. These COVID waivers are counting for those rehabs as well. So there's people that have been able to get out of default without having to make those 9 payments. the fact that they've extended those waivers to over a year and a half is really something too. I've worked with a lot of borrowers who have said that they would have defaulted because their income was significantly reduced due to the pandemic. And I've talked to other borrowers that have paid off or taken a huge chunk out of their loans because they've been enjoying that 0% interest rate. So it's just had a real positive impact on thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Well, I can tell you that one of those people is me. I actually paid off my student loan during this time due to, at least in part, to that 0% interest. So I know it's been very generous to people. I didn't know it was quite as generous as that. Can you tell us when this is coming to an end and what can borrowers expect?
Right. So at the last extension, they announced that the last extension would end January 31st of 2022. And they made it very clear that they do not expect to have any more extensions. So I know that borrowers are starting to ask me, oh, I think they might extend it again. Don't count. They are not going to extend it again. And there's a couple reasons for that. For one, the pandemic is, where the restrictions are, it sort of ebbs and flows a little bit on a day-to-day, but for the most part, the big hits are winding down and things are starting to open up again. But there's also a downside to what they did. And I think this is a big part of why they said no more after this. While what they did provided immediate relief in a pretty simple way, like people didn't have to apply for it, for example, they just sort of gave it to everybody. There's a lot of research out there that shows that a big indicator of successful student loan management is simply the borrowers that make their first 12 or 24 payments on time. Those people are way, way less likely to default than others. And what that's about, it's about the habit of repayment, just getting in the habit of repayment. And that's part of the psychology behind that loan rehabilitation program that I mentioned to you before. Is the reason you have to make 9 consecutive payments is part of it is showing good faith, but the other part is getting you back in the habit of making the payment. And we've taken people that had been in the habit of making a payment out of that habit for almost 2 years. So the longer that goes, the harder it's going to be for borrowers to get back in that habit. The other thing, the longer it goes, the more people move, and maybe they don't remember to update their contact information to their loan holder. So, there's a lot of reasons why it's unlikely they're going to extend again. One of the other issues is we've got 42 million people all being taken off this waiver at the same time. Now, I know that the Department of Education and the servicers have been working very hard to prepare for this, but the fact of the matter is you can't prepare for this. It's going to be a tidal wave. And I think borrowers are going to might experience extended wait times reaching their loan servicers to ask questions. They should expect to have experienced longer wait times getting paperwork processed, like if they have to apply for a lower payment option or a deferment. And I think that in and of itself might lead to an increase in delinquency and default rates. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. And again, I think it's something we're going to experience. It's going to take a while for the dust to settle on that. Now, borrowers can avoid being negatively impacted by my predicted delays, which again, I really, really hope I'm wrong, by starting to get ready, no later than like the middle of November. They should be looking, can I afford my payment? If I can't, what payment plan should I get on? And then be ready to submit their paperwork for that repayment plan or deferment, whatever it is they need, probably by the middle of December, no later than the beginning of January.
Now, if they're doing that, if they're looking in mid-November and they're trying to figure this out, can they actually contact their servicer and be counseled on which option is going to be the best for them before this comes out of a pause?
1,000% yes. Their servicer can go through the different repayment options with them If the borrower's ready with some numbers, meaning the borrower should have in front of them is their, or at least a ballpark, adjusted gross income, understanding what their family size is, having a general idea of what they can afford, whether if they are married, whether their spouse has student loans, because that could be part of the calculation, and what their spouse's income might be. If they have that stuff ready, or even if they don't, at least if they have a ballpark, then their servicer can go through all the options and give them an estimate of what their payment would be under those different plans. Now, the borrower can also do this all by themselves if you're like me and hate getting on the telephone. If you go to studentaid.gov, they have something called the loan simulator. And if you can plug your numbers in, and it will give you an estimate of not only what your payment will be, but also if you stayed on that plan, but the total amount you'd pay out of pocket over time. And if you were pursuing a loan forgiveness program, whether you would end up with forgiveness in the end. But the most important number of what I just listed is the amount you pay over time.
And why is that?
Well, the name of the game is to pay the least amount over time. So some people get hyper focused on either getting the lowest payment possible or loan forgiveness. And, unless you are pursuing loan forgiveness and are pretty confident you actually will get forgiveness in the end, choosing the lowest monthly payment usually means paying the most out of pocket. Interest accrues on student loans on a daily basis, and there is no minimum interest amount. So the quicker you pay the loan off, usually the least amount of interest you pay over time.
Now, I feel like this is probably a good time to sort of back up a little bit again and just clarify which loans that borrowers may have are affected by everything that we're talking about here and which loans are not.
Really, really good question. What we've been talking about for the most part are federal student loans. And within the federal student loans, there is multiple federal loan programs, which can cause some confusion. So back before 2010, there were two primary federal student loan programs, and they were both exactly the same, except where they were different. One program was called the Direct Loan Program, and the other was called the Federal Family Education Loan Program, or the FFEL. Now, the third major one is Perkins, and we'll park that one over here for a minute. FFEL and Direct Loans, they both have Stafford loans. They both have Parent Plus loans. They both have Grad Plus loans. They both did consolidations. And back then, the terms and conditions were pretty close to identical. Whether you got a FFEL or Direct Loan was not a choice that you, the consumer, had. It was based on what the school participated in, and the school could either participate in one or the other. And up until about 2009, at least 80% of the schools utilized the FFEL. And then in 2010, Congress got rid of the FFEL. So if all your loans were taken out after 2010, you have direct loans. If any were taken out prior, it could be either one. And for the COVID waivers were only applied, and this is again where it gets confusing for people, to federally held federal student loans. And what that means is all direct loans and a small portion of the FFEL and Perkins that have over the years had been sold to the Department of Education. Most FFEL and Perkins are what we call commercially held. Perkins loans are held by the school, and FFEL loans are held by a private lender. They are federal loans, but they're held by a private lender. And those were not eligible for any of the COVID waivers. Now, there's also private loans, and like MEFA, and state loans. There's also institutional loans. Those were never eligible for the COVID waivers, and whatever relief was made available to them was dependent on the lender and what they chose to offer.
Excellent. Okay. Now, if you're not sure what type of federal loans that you have, if you have those direct loans, or if you have those privately held federal loans, or even if you have private loans, how can you find out?
So all your federal loans are listed on the Department of Education's website, which is studentaid.gov. And if you have loans prior to 2010, you don't know if they're FFEL or direct, you can log in there and you can tell there. The easiest thing to do is call your loan holder, your servicer, and ask them, do I have FFEL or do I have direct? And they'll tell you. Private loans aren't going to show up at studentaid.gov. You would find them the best. If you don't know where they are, you don't know who holds them, check your credit report.
Can you explain basically who a servicer is, what it is, and if somebody doesn't know who their servicer is, what can they do?
Sure. A servicer is essentially a contractor that's been hired by the lender. And in some cases, that lender is the Federal Department of Education. In the direct loan program, the lender is the federal government. So a servicer is a contractor that's been hired to maintain the loan and collect the loan. So they're the ones that are going to answer your questions if you call. They're the ones that are processing your payment. They're the ones that are billing you for your payment. And up until the loan actually defaults, if you become delinquent on your payments, they're the ones that are going to be sending you those nudgy reminder letters or making nudgy reminder phone calls to you, and also to try to help you get current, or if you need a deferment and that kind of thing. And if you don't know who your servicer is, studentaid.gov. It will tell you who the servicer is, and the contact information for that servicer.
What do you think students or graduates, maybe some of whom haven't made payments yet, what will they expect to be seeing in terms of notifications or messages from their servicer leading up to their resumption of repayment?
Well, before I answer that, I think this is a great time to remind people that now is a great time to make extra sure that the Department of Education and your loan servicer has up-to-date contact information, because they're already starting to send out reminders and informational letters and emails to borrowers in anticipation of the ending of the COVID waivers at the end of January. So if they don't have your up-to-date address, you're not going to get that information. And not getting that information, if you end up going delinquent because of it, because you didn't realize that you had payments due again, that's not a defense to default. So it could negatively affect your credit, in either a mild way, just by showing you were 90 days delinquent, or in a huge way if you do end up defaulting. So you want to make sure they have up-to-date contact information. And then you want to make sure that you open your mail. If you're like me, who pays all their bills online, it can sometimes take a minute for you to open your mail. So if you have student loans, you want to make sure that you're opening all your mail, especially between now and the end of January, because it's going to tell you, they're going to tell you when your next payment's going to be due. It could be February. It might actually not be till March, depending on how the way things fall in the cycles. It's going to give you information about income-driven plans and how to apply for them and who's eligible for them. Information about deferment. You mentioned there's been a lot of news about servicers lately. A lot of that news is around servicers that aren't playing in student loans anymore. So loans are transferring to different servicers. These letters are going to let you know if your loan transferred and the contact information for who that new servicer is. So, and again, the Department of Ed, I believe, is already, and the servicers are starting to send that information out within the next couple of weeks.
I wanted to ask one more thing about, and it's not about the resumption of federal student loan payment. It's about the other federal loan topic that is frequently discussed in the media, and that is the public service loan forgiveness option. And you alluded to that earlier. And I know there's been some significant and temporary changes, and I don't know if you wanted to discuss the changes or not.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this topic by itself, how long is the podcast? We've got like 5-6 hours, right?
Sure.
We have it all written out, I would like to say, in plain English. And we also have an FAQ document that also contains case studies. I don't know, shameless plug, on our website, which is freestudentloanadvice.org. So if they go to freestudentloanadvice.org, go to the forgiveness tab, they'll see public service loan forgiveness and all the things, plus more explanation and a link to that FAQ document. They're all right there for you.
freestudentloanadvice.org.
Right. And then if they have questions even after that, just go to our contact page and email us through the contact page. And like I said, we answer most questions within a business day. So,
well, thank you so much. This was as great as I thought it was going to be. So it's great to see you again. Great to have this conversation, and good to have this resource for folks who may need it. And so hopefully you'll come back and talk about public student loan.
I love talking about this stuff. So whenever you like, let's do it.
Thank you so much, Betsy.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, you too. All right. Well, that is our show, everyone. Julie, thanks for answering all those questions today.
Happily. Love it.
Remember, if you like the show, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're hearing this. And if you could do us an extra favor and give us a 5-star rating, that would help us out a lot. Until next time, goodbye, everybody.